Josh Rawitch, the president of the Baseball Hall of Fame. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Oh, definitely. It's really cool to be able to chat with you. Of course, you have a baseball background working with the Dodgers, the Diamondbacks. So, how did you get into those roles in Major League Baseball?
Well, I was very lucky when I was a freshman at IU. I had a professor my freshman year say, "Don't be afraid to send your resume to your hometown team. You never know what'll happen." And I didn't even have a resume, but I kind of threw something together, fired it off, and in the mid '90s, things were a little less challenging to break into the world then. So I was fortunate enough to land an internship after my freshman summer with the Dodgers, and I just kept begging them to come back. I just kept doing more and more, taking on more responsibility, and then when I graduated college, a full time position opened up like 2 weeks before I graduated. So stars aligned, and I was able to spend all those years at the Dodgers, and then while I was at the Dodgers, I met the guy who would eventually become the president of the Diamondbacks. He's the one that pulled me over to Arizona, and while I was there, I met the president of the Hall of Fame. And when he left, he's the one that pulled me to Cooperstown. So a lot of times, just if the people that you meet throughout your career help you get to your next step.
Sounds like it was that easy, huh?
It sounds way. I mean,
I
it
know.
is pretty crazy. I do feel very, very fortunate that it's worked out the way that it has.
Yeah, definitely. I have had some internships as well, so I know what it's like kind of being able to meet people, make those connections. So that's really cool to hear. And then with the Dodgers and the D-backs, I know you were doing like marketing and PR and then content. You were the senior vice president of content and communications with Arizona, right?
Yeah, that was my role when I left. Yeah.
So what were those roles like for you in terms of just kind of the responsibilities that you had with those teams or with the Arizona Diamondbacks at least?
Yeah, so as I was coming up in kind of marketing and PR was a lot different. It was functions of like advertising or actual media relations where I'd work on the game notes or the media guide or setting up interviews with players and things of that nature. But as I kind of moved up at the Diamondbacks, when I moved to the Diamondbacks, our president there, Derek Hall, who was came from the same sort of background as a PR person, he had kind of promised he would let me get involved in all sorts of things that maybe not every PR person in the league would have that opportunity to do. And he came through in a million ways. There were so many opportunities to sit in and watch how he learned and learn how he led an organization. And so by the time I left, I guess I was ultimately overseeing a handful of departments, everything from the media relations and PR department to the graphic designers to our in-game big screen board and the events that we would put on that were like stuff you'd see on the field before the game, the first pitch and that sort of stuff. They were basically everything that you would see publicly was what I was responsible for. And I wound up social media, those sorts of things. So as I ultimately kind of got to be responsible, or all the people in our area were responsible for what the team looked like and sounded like. That's basically what the senior VP of content and communications was at the D-backs.
Yeah, it's really awesome. It reminds me of my internship with the Green Jackets in Augusta in 2016 on a very smaller level, of course, compared to the major leagues. But yeah, I was doing a lot of that communications type stuff, the marketing type of things. So, of course, you're the president of the Baseball Hall of Fame. So, I know you mentioned that you met someone with Arizona that led you to where you are now, but like, how did that kind of come about for you? Or in your wildest imagination, could you have expected something like that?
No, I mean, there really isn't. And I can remember the day that Jeff Idelson, who was my predecessor here, he was the president, and he worked at the Hall for almost, I think, 25 years between his time in communications at the Hall and as president. He called one day, and I knew he was leaving, and I thought he was calling to tell me what his new job was going to be. And he said, "Hey, I'm just curious if you've ever thought about my position here. There's a few of you in the game that I think would be pretty good that I'm passing your names on to the board, and I just did. If you're not interested, I won't pass your name on. But if you'd want to have a conversation, I think you'd be a good fit for it." And I just remember being like kind of dumbfounded. Nobody thinks they would go from Cooperstown to.
Yeah,
I mean, like
yeah.
it just is not a thing that anybody would ever imagine would be where their career would lead them. But I said, well, I'm honored. I'm floored. Let me go home, talk to my wife, and see what she thinks. And when I came home that night, I remember saying to her, like, "You're not going to believe the call I got today." And I told her about it, and she said, "How would you ever turn that down if you got offered that position?" That is. And so I've been very, very lucky to have an incredibly supportive spouse, and um, family was great. So ultimately, that's how it led to this. Was I then went through the interview process with our chairman of the board, Jane Forbes Clark, who ultimately is my boss here. I answer to the board, but other members of the board who were part of the search committee, everybody from Cal Ripken Jr. I interviewed with to the commissioner of
Oh,
baseball,
wow.
Rob Manfred's on our board. Harvey Schiller, who's a titan in the industry, and ultimately they landed on as me as the right fit.
That's awesome. So, what's your daily life or the duties as the president? Like, what's your daily day basically like in Cooperstown?
Hmm. It varies a lot from day to day, because when you think about an organization this big, we're much bigger than I think most people realize. We've got about 90 full time employees and probably closer to 200 when you're talking about part time employees. There's always, I mean, today alone, we've covered everything from the upcoming era committee election to the BBWA voting process to personnel issues, just like any other company would have, to budget planning for next year to um, possible donors. We're a nonprofit. Most people think we get funded by MLB, but we're a completely separate nonprofit. So, talking about the membership process, there's honestly on any given day, I probably have, I don't know, 6 to 8 different meetings on different topics tied to something going on at the hall. And that's part of what I love is that it's not all one specific thing. It could be a different thing any day. And I love that. It's in a lot of ways, it's not that dissimilar from running any other business. There's finance, there's HR, there's legal, there's all these things that you're dealing with. And I love that. I think that's pretty cool.
And I can imagine, just like any job, all the specific challenges that can come along, but probably none greater than what happened with the pandemic in 2020, right?
Yeah, I was still with the Diamondbacks when that happened, and it truly was. I mean, I think about the worst day in my career. Frankly, was the day that we had to let about a quarter of the staff either let them go or furlough them for multiple months, and it just nothing you do in college or in your career leading up to that can ever prepare you to deal with changing people's lives and careers and livelihoods and then ultimately trying to figure out how are we going to get through all this stuff and how do you I mean I was one of the few people that was allowed to be around the team because I was traveling, so you're testing, you're doing COVID tests every other day. We were getting tested and you're living in this bubble, and it was really in so many ways like an unbelievably horrible time. And yet I feel like baseball did an incredible job somehow of pulling through it. At the end of the day, they were able to crown a champion. They were able to have a season, something that I don't think any of us thought
Yeah.
when. I mean, when it first happened in March, I think most of us thought, "Oh, we'll be back in a couple of weeks." And once you started realizing, come May and June, just how serious this was, to be able to then be back where we are now is pretty amazing. And my understanding at the hall here was it was equally as challenging, if not more, because you're really in a bit of a remote area and trying to get people to come here was a huge challenge. And as a nonprofit, we got hit pretty hard.
What are your maybe typical challenges now, as you're the president of the Hall of Fame? What's maybe things that you're, I don't know, working towards? Maybe things that aren't as, I don't know. I don't want to say as easy as you might have thought, but what are like maybe those typical challenges like?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing, and I talked a lot with Jane about this when we went through the interview process, but how do we keep this incredible institution relevant for the next generation of fans? I think about the first time I came with my dad about 20 years ago, and it's a different venue now than it was then, and it's going to have to be different 20 years from now because kids are going to be going through this building and they're going to be very different than the way my
Yeah.
grandparents would have walked around in the 70s. Or I mean, you think about a place that's gone back to 1939. It's in so many ways what makes this place so special is that it feels like stepping into a time machine. You walk around on Main Street and there's not a lot that's changed. It feels very similar, and yet we know that our fans consume baseball differently, and they don't just want to walk around and look at just here's a really cool baseball or a document or a photo. They want to be interactive. So I think a lot of what we're working on is how do we make this place continue to be relevant for the next generation of fans. And then honestly, a lot of what I do is how do we fund all these things that we want to do? Because like I said, as a nonprofit, part of what we're doing is we're looking for donors who look at this and say, you know what, I want to be a part of the Hall of Fame. I want to help preserve the history of the game. But it's not. I mean, when you think about the charities you might support, you think about the American Cancer Society or juvenile diabetes, or those things are kind of ever present in people's lives. Cooperstown isn't necessarily the sort of thing where you think, it's the end of the year, I should find a way to help preserve the history of the game or help digitize these documents or whatever. So we're always thinking about how can we raise money to try to do the things that we want to try to do in the years to come.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I actually work with nonprofit fundraising, so it's kind of in that area. It's kind of familiar, but it's
Yeah,
really
so you
really
get it.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What are your favorite parts? I mean, you have what feels like the coolest job, right? I know it's very important and serious and things like that, but I mean, at the end of the day, you're the president of the Hall of Fame. So, what's your favorite parts or things that you've maybe come across or been able to do? I'm sure you've interacted with so many Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
What's maybe
I
the top
mean,
of your list?
it is as cool as you would think it would be. There's no doubt. I mean, I really, there are days where I really can't believe that this is where my career has led me. And I feel very, very fortunate and grateful. Um, I mean, yes, certainly dealing with the Hall of Famers, anybody who's a living Hall of Famer at this point, I've had the chance to speak to, and in many cases spend time with and get to know a little bit. And I love that. I mean, that obviously that would be any kid's dream to like look around and you're sitting on the stage at the induction and your baseball card collections come to life to, sitting all around you. But I think what's really, there's two things that I think probably more than anything, more than the Hall of Famers, and this isn't a knock on the Hall of Famers, it's just more of what the job is A, I love leading an institution of people that care deeply about this place. So I come in every single day and I love the idea that what we're trying to do is preserve the history of this game that I've loved since I was 5 years old. That's a really cool thing to say you get to come in and do every day.
Yeah.
And then the other really, really cool thing, frankly, is almost every day I get to do something that the person on the other end is going to remember for the rest of their life. Not because I'm Josh Rawitch, it's because the title behind my name, I might send an email and somebody will write back and be like, this is the coolest thing in the world. I got an email from the president of the Hall of Fame, or you like a tweet, or you introduce somebody to their favorite player, or you maybe let them hold a Luke. I had a big donor here earlier today, and um, we brought them on a collections tour, and they got a chance to hold a Lou Gehrig bat in their hands. They are going to be talking about that for the next 50 years of their life. And almost every day we do something where that's the feeling that these people get. And I just don't think there's a whole lot of jobs. Certainly felt that way at the Diamondbacks and Dodgers, where you could always you hand a little kid a ball on the field, and they're 25 years from now, they're going to say, "I remember that guy at the Diamondbacks who handed me that baseball on the field." And it's just an incredibly cool thing that this sport does for people.
Yeah, that is really cool. I was curious too. So I don't know how your role may or may not even interact in terms of like the balloting, the voting process. What do you have a is your role in any way? I mean, it feels silly to ask, is it in any way intertwined with that? But I don't really know how your role might work in terms of like the voting and that process and how that works out. So what is that
Sure.
kind of like for you in terms of when that time of year comes for the Hall of Fame voting for the next class comes in?
Yeah, so we have a really, really talented staff here, and one of the key people who leads that is John Shestakovsky. He's our vice president of communications and education, and he's really kind of the guru on voting and on the process. What he'll do, and in fact, literally yesterday, we just announced the names of the 28 people that'll be on the BBWAA ballot. He and his staff sent out 400 ballots to all the baseball writers who are eligible, and it comes with a letter that's got I prove it and I sign. My name is on it. Ultimately, it's encouraging thanking them for their role in helping document history. And so I would say I'm involved every step of the way in both processes, the BBWAA and the ERA committee process, which is coming up next month at the winter meetings, where we look back at eras of those who didn't get in through the baseball writers. They'll get a chance. They'll get a second chance to be looked at by a committee of 16, and this year it's those from 1980 forward. But I mean, literally the entire process I'm very, very familiar with. I'm involved with. I'll be in the room when the
Okay.
ERA committee will sit and talk through the 8 candidates who are on the ballot, and then ultimately, I guess I get to be the one who is on national TV and announces who gets in. Which is, again, you just think of when you're growing up a fan of all of these guys. The idea that that's part of my job now is really pretty insane.
Yeah, no, I figured that you probably had a pretty direct role with that, but and I didn't think that it was like, oh, when that day comes that we hear the country or the world, I guess, finds out who's getting inducted. I figured you already knew before that, but I was kind of curious with how your
But
role played into that.
not much
Yeah,
before. I mean, I really
yeah,
don't find out until, I mean, the ERA committee process. The meetings happen throughout the morning, so I might know a few hours before, but it's not like I know days before. And on the BBWAA, we don't know. Same thing. Like we tally the 400 ballots over the course of a day, and then we go on live TV later that night. So again, I might have an hour or two heads up, but we don't have any more knowledge than you do prior to that.
Yeah, it's funny talking about 2020 and COVID and everything. I had actually planned to go to Cooperstown for the first time 2020, right before COVID, literally the week before everything shut down. I had everything set up to go. I was going to go for Jeter's induction basically, and then that's when COVID happened. And I was like, this probably won't happen. In 2021, I finally got there, so it was cool for me to finally get there. Made the personal solo trip. Finally saw the induction, got into the museum. So it was really incredible to finally make it there and see that. So yeah, it was definitely something I was definitely able to, one of those like bucket list items I was glad to be able to knock off.
What's amazing is how many people put it on their bucket list, and then
Yeah.
it kind of surprises me how I'll talk to people in the game who have worked in baseball for 20 years, 30, and they say, "No, I've never made it there. I've been meaning to go forever." And the reality is, it's not that. I mean, people do weekend trips to all sorts of places around the country, and you could easily fly on a Friday, be here Friday night, spend all day Saturday and part of Sunday at the museum, and go home. And it's actually a fairly simple trip to do. I mean, I get that we aren't 10 minutes from the airport,
Right.
but it is so well worth it when people do make that trek and that pilgrimage. It's worth it every single time, and we see people walking around the plaque gallery, and they're just kind of, their mind is blown that they're in this place that they've heard about forever. And people, I think a lot of people think that we're just a plaque gallery, but we're, as you know,
Yeah.
because you've been, a 3-story
Yeah.
museum with all sorts of really cool stuff all over the museum that you can, and it takes you back to when you were a kid and whatever era you grew up watching. You're looking at your favorite players. Here's their spikes, or here's a bat, or here's a glove, or here's a document that from the library. It is well worth the trip. I hope people do make that pilgrimage like you did.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm in Virginia, and it was like honestly, it was an easy 7 hour or so drive, and I was like, this is actually pretty simple. I just knocked it out in a couple days. I mean, I got there on a Tuesday,
Yeah.
induction on Wednesday, back on like Thursday, and I was like, that was easy. I could do that again.
Well, you should. I hope you do, and I hope you let us know when you're coming, because there's what is cool. It's funny. My parents happen to be in town right now, and they were just talking about how when you're here in the wintertime, November, December, January, February, you almost have the Hall of Fame almost to yourself. There are
That's
days
true.
where you're walking around and you get, there's not a whole lot of people around you, and that's really, really cool. And when you come during the summertime, there's a million other things to do in Cooperstown that people
Yeah.
don't really think about. Other museums, we sit right on this amazing lake. You can rent a boat, go out on the lake. If you're a golfer, you can go golfing. There's all sorts of art museums and children's museums and really cool places. Just walking around on Main Street, you could do for a few hours, walking in and out of the shops. And so I think it's again, I think the vision of what Cooperstown is. Some people may think, oh, it's just this simple, the only thing there is the Hall of Fame, and that's definitely not the case. It's really an amazing spot.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was staying in Oneonta, like a half an hour or so away. Just drove up, and I had it all planned out so meticulously because I wanted to make sure I hit everything I was trying to do, and it worked out. So I
That's
was
the
like
cool.
going in, I was like, I had my blueprint plan of like, all right, I need to be here at this time to get to the induction site, back to the museum. So it
I
really
love
worked
it.
out pretty well. I'm sure you have tons of like incredible stories, but what's maybe something that kind of comes to mind first when you think about like I talked, maybe it was like I don't know. I'm throwing names out, Vince Scully or whoever, Derek Jeter or any Hall of Famers maybe that you've interacted with or otherwise, maybe things that you've done or seen or heard or talked to in terms of like that's at the top of your list, basically.
Well, I mean, just you mentioned those two names, and I do feel very fortunate that almost any Hall of Famer you can throw out there, I can tell you some story of some interaction. But Vin in particular, I was very close with when I was at the Dodgers. He was my childhood idol. It was really what I thought I wanted to do when I went to school, was to be a broadcaster. And it wasn't until I started doing sports marketing and management that I actually realized I didn't. But to have your childhood hero, somebody like Vin Scully, become someone that I would literally almost every day for many years go into the booth, check in with him, see what's going on, give him some information that he might use on the air, answer whatever questions he has. I mean, once I left the Dodgers, I stayed in touch with him over the years, and I mean, like I can remember sometimes for some weird reason I was in his phone in a place where he would butt dial me, so I would occasionally get these like Vin Scully's trying to FaceTime, and I'd look at my phone and be like, "This is ridiculous!" Like he
Yeah.
obviously isn't trying to FaceTime me. Um, but I stayed in touch with them, and I remember calling him when I had the opportunity to take this job or to interview for this job, and I said, "I just want you to know I'm going to put you down as a reference on my resume, and curious what your take is." And he was, "Oh, Josh, you would be so great at that." And it was just to hear your childhood voice tell you how happy he was for me when I got this position. And It's just one of so many opportunities that I've had that just on a daily basis I count my blessings. And really the other huge passion that I love traveling internationally. I've done endless amounts of trips in 44 countries or so over my life, just backpacking with my friends. But I've also had the chance to, I think, work in 9 or 10 countries specific to baseball and seen games in China and Venezuela and the Dominican and Mexico and Australia and New Zealand. And to be able to travel the whole world and sit down with Sadahara O and listen to him talk about hitting with myself, Tony La Russa, Randy Johnson, and Luis Gonzalez. That, like, who gets to do
It's
that?
like a
I,
Mount
I just
Rushmore.
it really, and I find
Yeah.
myself like often sitting in these rooms going, I have no business being in this room with these guys, but it's I've never lost sight of how fortunate I am to have those opportunities. And um, yeah, I just feel very, very lucky that this sport that I've given my life to has given me so much more back.
Yeah, definitely. I was curious too. So with regards to like a Hall of Fame induction ceremony, what kind of I guess how challenging is it to plan one of those, and not even a COVID year, just a normal year in terms of just like the next one, 2023.
Yeah.
I'm sure that planning is already underway, but or will be soon if not already. But what kind of goes into all of that, all those logistics?
Yeah, what's really cool about specifically that event is that it does really, we really, like the week after, everybody kind of tries to veg a little bit and recover, but then pretty quickly you're getting back into, okay, let's plan for next year. When you're talking about a town of less than 2,000 people hosting 30, 40, 50,000 people, and the amount of logistics that go into it are mind boggling. And yet they've been doing it here for so long that everybody kind of knows their role. Yes, of course, endless hours of planning go into it. But what's so cool from my standpoint is to watch the staff who they may have taken a job as a librarian and that's what they love to do, but for that weekend they're running transportation, or it might be somebody in
Uh,
the warehouse and that's what they're trained to do is shipping and receiving and merchandise, and that's what they're going to do during induction weekend is hospitality at the hotel with the Hall of Famers. So everybody kind of has their other roles. People know it, they love it, they thrive in that environment. It is incredibly taxing.
yeah.
It's not just one Sunday; it's all of the events for the days leading up and the days afterward, and all the media pieces. I mean, you've got hundreds and hundreds of media members coming in. So I mean, it's a ton of work, but it's something that everybody here takes great pride in being able to execute and say, like, you know what, my job may be as a receptionist under normal circumstances, but for that weekend, I'm helping whatever at the media center with credentials, and it's a really, really cool thing to watch have happen. And you just it's if you haven't seen it, it's really hard to explain when you watch a town with just a handful of streets and 2,000 full-time residents turn into the center of the baseball universe for a weekend.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I got to experience that, and it was, of course, 2021, so it was on that Wednesday, not the typical Sunday, but probably, I mean, it was still a huge crowd. I know it wasn't quite as big as normal, but,
Yeah.
that also reminds me, again, being in Augusta during Masters Week, I had nothing to do with the Masters, but I just remember seeing what it was like for, the entire world basically in one small town for a week or so, so I can kind of understand what you're referencing there.
Yeah, and I mean, you can imagine the full time staff. Most places have an event staff. If you're an event company, if you're putting on a golf
Yeah.
tournament, your job is to have event people do that. And here we have literally one person whose full time job is events, and the rest of the company's full time job is other things, whether it's merchandise or finance or whatever, HR. And you've got to figure out, okay, well, how do we get volunteers here? Someone's got to coordinate hundreds of volunteers passing out water because it's getting hot. We want to make sure that nobody passes out in the actual field out at the Clark Sports Center. So just a huge point of pride for this place and something I've really enjoyed seeing.
Yeah, one of the last things I had. So I think you kind of touched on it already. I was going to ask you what are your goals for the Hall of Fame and moving forward, and you kind of touched on that in terms of kind of how to like you're basically. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but basically saying how you can kind of keep things relevant for the next generation and beyond. But is that kind of like the main or among the goals that you have is that aspect, or are there maybe some other like other things as well, maybe that you're like really excited about for whether it's the upcoming few years or really any time? But
Well, I tell you that the thing that the whole institution has been working on that we're all very excited about and will be coming in 2024 is our next big exhibit is going to focus on black baseball. the history of black baseball going back to the 1800s all the way through modern times, and some of the best black players in the game today. We when we the hall is actually, I think most people are surprised. We've had various types of exhibits focused on black baseball going back 30, 40 years. And as time has gone on, we've taken what was at one point a small case, and then eventually that was focused on the Negro Leagues. And then come 1997, we did a full exhibit on basically the history of black baseball up to that point. But 25 years have passed, so we're completely redoing the exhibit that's focused on black baseball. And then on top of that, there's going to be elements that go out and travel in the community and that are going to be online. So the whole institution is really heavily involved in this project that when we open in April 2024 is going to be just an incredible, I just think something that everybody here is going to be proud of, and hopefully the community will be proud of, and that people will learn a lot from. You just, when you're a history institution like this that focuses on, we're constantly trying to learn new things. And I think it's not a lot of jobs maybe where you feel like every day you're coming in and you learn something new, but I mean, literally every single day I'm learning something new. So I would say that's the next major initiative that we're really focused on. As I mentioned, some of the technologies and some of the other, um, I think we're just there's in a few years we may be looking at the first time we have a Japanese player inducted into the Hall of Fame with Ichiro and all that would
Yeah.
go
Oh,
into
yeah.
that sort of thing. But you don't want to look too far ahead. We've got some great classes between now and then that
Yeah.
will keep it. And I guess that ultimately what we're trying to do is get people to come to Cooperstown. That's what
Yeah.
at its core we want people to come visit us here, and I think we have to keep finding ways to make people do that. There's more and more options for your dollar, and people could stay at home and do things online, and we want them to get up, get in the car, or get on a plane, come see us, and then tell everybody what a great time they had when they were here.
Definitely. Well, I have to say, I was watching an interview that you did with the MLB Network on YouTube earlier. It was I watched it this morning, but you did it a couple months ago, I believe. And one of the things that you mentioned was that you like basically people that try to get on your radar or reach out to you or get in your inbox, basically. And I had, of course, reached out before I saw that, but I was like, oh, I'm glad I did that. So you never know until you try. So I'm glad I was able to reach out to you and talk with you today.
I appreciate you doing that, and honestly, I think this industry is filled with people who want to help, people who look at others who love the game. And I mean, I got so many people who helped me throughout my career. That's what I try to do is give back a little bit, whether it's to students who are aspiring to be in a career like this, or just being able to spread the word about what's going on at the hall on a podcast. I think that's all an important part of this job, and so happy to do it, and wishing you well going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Hope you have a good rest of your week and a good Thanksgiving as well.
Awesome. Same to you. Enjoy.